an area where I've been doing a lot of work lately is around rural homelessness, and I think it's really under recognized
Yep.
in Canada, and that rural homelessness is a much more significant issue than is being acknowledged. So, and I've been doing a lot of work around rural homelessness lately in terms of just sort of like trying to crunch some of the numbers. So gather up point in time counts and other enumerations in rural areas, and finding that rates of homelessness, even if the absolute numbers are smaller than they are in cities, the rate, so the percentage of people living in a rural town who are homeless will be higher than the percentage of people who are homeless in Toronto, for
Mm-hmm.
example, or even in Thunder Bay. So Thunder Bay is not rural; it serves a large rural region, but it's a very small city. But its rate of homelessness is double what it is in Toronto, and double what it is in Calgary, and triple what it is in Vancouver. So, so I think um, part of the challenge around rural homelessness is recognizing what a significant issue it is, and also trying to rethink the way our policy approaches and approaches to funding solutions to homelessness. Because right now, all of the solutions to homelessness that are funded have sort of a major bias towards urban homelessness, and we need to direct way more resources to rural communities to be able to support homelessness as well. And we also know that there are a lot of people who come from rural environments, they go to cities because they see there being more resources in cities to access to support them in their housing needs. And so yeah, there's a really important role to play in supporting rural service providers towards ending homelessness in Canada.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Christy and I have been doing some research in City of Kawartha Lakes, which is a town of about 15,000 services. It's, it's Southern Ontario, so there's more services here, but the number of folks that have come in from places like Halliburton and rural surrounding the town, and then they move into town and they have nobody around them that they know. They've come into town just because they're looking for services, and they've been living in some single family dwelling out in the middle of nowhere with no access and no transportation and that sort of thing. We miss them. You don't see them. You don't see them in the big like they do in the urban centers. And amazing how many folks transient moving from one small town to another looking for the better shelter or the better um, case coordinator person or something like that. So there's a lot of shift. It's hard to count who's actually homeless in that area. But
Yeah. The
mhm.
churn. I don't know who coined that term, whether it was Carol Calpe or someone else, but that sort of someone used that term once, churn of people kind of constantly moving around between different places. Because it's not sort of like a unidirectional, like moving from the rural area to the city and then you stay there. It will be back and forth
Mhm.
and between different rural areas and different
Mhm.
towns and cities and that sort of thing. So yeah, the rural homelessness piece is a big one. Another thing, I was trying to sum up this whole idea of like the complexity of homelessness, right? Like there's this simplicity of like, we need houses, we don't have enough of them. And we need support services too. So people need housing and they need supports. We know that. But then it's making sure that we have the right mix of housing and supports to meet each individual's needs. And I think rural areas are one of the most difficult places to address that solution, because in cities you sort of have that what's the word, the critical mass of people where you
Mhm.
can have enough, you can have all of that different array of services, you can have like really specialized services for all of the different situations that people might encounter. But when you're in a smaller rural place, there's just not that critical mass to support those services. So how do we provide that? Like, do we do this through, I don't know, is it like a telehealth kind of model that we then adapt for the way that we provide homelessness services, or I don't know. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big, I think, piece of the puzzle that still needs to be solved in terms of rural homelessness, and of course youth homeless. I haven't done a lot of work in youth homelessness. I think it's really um, some of the most important work that's being done is kind of
Mhm.
getting to youth, and we know that when youth experience homelessness, they're more likely to experience homelessness than throughout their lives, and recurrent episodes of homelessness. And and yeah, supporting youth so that they can yeah,
Even prevention, if
not,
anything, right?
yeah, prevent youth homelessness, or at the very least try and resolve so that there aren't those there isn't that sort of recurrent homelessness.
hmm hmm Well, and you get in the rural areas, you get the one-ofs, so you get the one person who potentially is a transgendered person, and they're the only person in the community potentially, and and there's no specialized services at all. Um, and we have, one shelter that's supposed to serve families and singles and women and men, and so that kind of you can't sort of use a funding formula that works in downtown Toronto for, someplace like Thunder Bay. The funding formula just doesn't
Yeah.
work. hmm
Well,
And
and
that's
that's it
how,
as well. I mean, and
there we go.
there's the housing costs. So the housing costs, but then also all the other costs as well. Energy
hmm
costs more in the north. Food
hmm
costs more in the north. All of those other things that if you don't have food and you don't have utilities, you might have a roof over your head, but we would still consider that hidden homelessness anyway. So
hmm
yeah, the funding formulas are definitely challenging as well, and recognizing all of those interrelated issues. So yes, you can have a house, someone can have a rent supplement, but if they don't have food, if they don't have heating or proper water, anyway, all those related
hmm
issues, then
hmm
um, it's not going to make things better.
No, that's right. I know Christy was working a little bit with a group in Halliburton last year. They have a heat bank, as I think is what they called it, with, like you would go to a food bank to get food, you go to the heat bank to get wood. Um, for the wood stoves in the rural area for folks that were living in poverty or below the poverty line, or living in these single family dwellings that were probably, old cottages or old shacks that um, people were actually squatting on or living in or what have you, and they didn't have any heat in the winter. So it's a different world. It's a different
Mm-hmm.
world.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of challenges there
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
hmm